and welcome to the Law Lab YouTube channel. Here we dissect and unpack everything legal. My name remains Aaron Asieduenchi, and today I'm presenting from the Jataba Media Network studios, live from Bawe, Accra. Today we are looking at constitutional law, and specifically on introduction to constitutional law. Our table of contents today would be looking at what is constitutional law. Then we will look at what is a constitution itself. We will proceed to look at the types of constitutions we have. And the last one, we will tackle the sources of constitutional law. We'll be looking at what is constitutional law. We will look at what is constitution or what is a constitution. And we will proceed to look at the types of constitutions we have. And last, we will look at the sources of constitutional law. And so I'm starting with what is constitutional law. Most of the times, when you hear what is an area of law, say company law, say contract law, say law of evidence, or any other area of law you hear, you see clearly it is two words put together. The area of law plus the law. So in this circumstance, we are looking at constitutional and also or what is constitutional and law. So basically, when you are presented with such a question, a simple understanding or a simple answer you should be given is that it is the law that governs constitutions. So when you are asked what is constitutional law, the simple answer you should be given is that it is the law that governs constitutions. But the next thing is that most of us, or in fact all of us, know what law is. Remember, I have always settled on one definition of what law is by Professor Wendell Holmes. He says, the law is the prophecies of what the court will do in fact, and nothing more pretentious. That is what he believes is law. You might find a lot of definitions of law, but this is what I choose, and also the Law Lab associates itself with. But you see, as I mentioned to you, that constitutional law is the law that governs constitutions. The base word constitution has not been defined. And so the question that will be running through your mind is what a constitution is, or what is a constitution. Now, when you look into a lot of literatures, when you look into a lot of textbooks, when you go online, you might find a lot of definitions of what constitution is. But I am not interested in all those things. What I am interested in is to tell you what the Constitution does. And so clearly you could see that I have my Constitution 1992 with me. And you could see that the Constitution has really suffered looking at the solid tape and others adjusted it because I frequently use it. It is a Bible for all students of law. Now, what does this Constitution do? It does two things. First, it creates the state, and I've provided on the screen, you clearly see that Article 1+1 of the Constitution tells you why I say that the Constitution creates the state. Let us read. Article 1+1 of the Constitution says, the sovereignty of Ghana resides in the people of Ghana, and in whose name and for whose welfare the powers of government are to be exercised in a manner within the limits laid down in the Constitution. So I mentioned that the Constitution creates two things. First, it creates the states, and I've provided an authority for that, Article 1+1 of the Constitution 1992. The next thing the Constitution does is it creates the arms of government. And basically, I know from your government classes in SHS, you know that we are having three arms of government, i.e., the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. And to find authorities in this Constitution, when we are talking of the executive, quickly move to Chapter 8 of the Constitution, and Article 58 will tell you that the executive authority in this country, Ghana, is vested in the president. Also, Chapter 10 of the Constitution 1992 talks about the legislature, and Article 93+2 of the Constitution 1992 will tell you that the legislative authority in Ghana or of Ghana is vested in the legislature, i.e. Parliament. And the third thing is that it also creates the judiciary. And chapter 11 of the Constitution 1992 discusses or talks about the judiciary, and Article 125 clause 3 will tell you that the judicial power or judicial authority of this country is vested in the judiciary, and they are exercising this judicial power for and on behalf of the people of Ghana. So basically, the Constitution does two things. As I mentioned earlier on, I am not interested in the Constitution looking into literatures mentioning that the Constitution are rules or laws that are codified or placed in one book to be governing the country or not. I am only interested in what the Constitution does. And I've mentioned to you that first, it creates two things, i.e. the states, and second, it creates the arms of government. It does not end there. The Constitution goes ahead to distribute powers amongst these arms of government. That is the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. And so clearly I mentioned to you, when you read Article 58 clause 1, Article 93 clause 2, and Article 125 clause 3, you get to know that the Constitution 1992 is distributing the powers amongst all these three arms of government. And so the next thing we should be looking at is that after the Constitution creating these two bodies, i.e. the states and the government, and distributing powers to the arms of government, what next? The next thing is that the Constitution now mandates those in government, which in Ghana we have a popular parlance, people in power, people in government, or those in government, to be dealing or protecting the rights of those they are governing, who we term as the governed. So the arms of government, you have the state on one side, the arms of government or the people in government protecting the rights of the citizens or the governed. And the governed in turn have some responsibilities which they need to perform towards those in government. And so when you read Article 41 of the Constitution 1992, it outlines all the responsibilities that is expected of every citizen in this country. Having known what the Constitution does, the next thing we should be looking at is the types of constitutions. And I'll be looking at basically 4 of them. It goes on and on. The list is unending. It depends on how you are looking at the types of constitution. I'm looking at 4. First, I'm looking at whether it is written and unwritten. So you can have a written constitution and an unwritten constitution. And so when we mention that a constitution is written, what do we mean? We mean that it is a constitution that has actually been written down and codified into a single book, like the Constitution 1992 of Ghana. This constitution has about 299 articles. It has 26 chapters and also 37 transitional provisions. So they are all codified into a single book, like what I'm holding. Now, when we talk of an unwritten constitution, it doesn't mean that we have not they are not written down. An unwritten constitution in this case, they are actually written down, but they are not codified into a single book like the 1992 constitution. So a typical example is that of the UK's constitution. The UK constitution is scattered. You find some in Acts of Parliament, you find some in subsidiary legislations, amongst others. So they are not really codified into a single book. But for written constitution like that of Ghana's, it is codified into a single book. The next type of constitution I'll be looking at is the rigid and flexible type of constitution. When I mention rigid and flexible, all that I mean is that with regards to the amendment of the constitution, it is very difficult, or you need to go through a laborious process in order to amend the constitution. But when we talk of a flexible constitution, it is very easy for you to amend the constitution. So when you pick when you open to chapter 25 of our Constitution 1992, it gives you 2 ways in amending our constitution. First, we have entrenched provisions and non-entrenched provisions. If you want to amend an entrenched provision in Ghana or an entrenched provision in the Constitution 1992, all that you have to do is that you have to go through a referendum, as in the entire country voting to amend the constitution. It has a whole process, and there will be another editorial on that to explain how referendums should be, most especially in regards to amending our constitution 1992. But the non-entrenched provisions is left within the purview of the parliament to clearly deal with that and just amend that provision through an act of parliament. And so you see, in amending the constitution 1992, it's difficult. So our constitution, or I wouldn't say it's difficult, it is laborious. Like, you go through a rigorous process in doing that. So I'll say our constitution 1992 is a rigid constitution. With regards to flexible constitution, all that we mean is that it can be amended easily, like that of the UK's constitution. So today, UK takes a decision to leave the European Union, that is Brexit. Tomorrow they can pass another act to join the European Union. It becomes very easy. It is very easy in doing that. Another type of constitution is the unitary and the federal one. So unitary, like Ghana, we have one state, it's a unitary state. The entire country is having one constitution we are dealing with. But when you move to federal states like the US, like Nigeria, the central government has its constitution, and every state, that is because it's a federal state, every state within Nigeria would one way or the other have their own constitution that they will be dealing with. Example is that of the US. You know that in US, some states do approve of LGBTQIA plus amongst others, but some other states do not also agree with that. The last type of constitution I would want to deal with is the unicameral and the bicameral type of constitution. When we talk of unicameral constitution, we are looking at a constitution that creates only one chamber of parliament, like that of Ghana. And when you talk of a bicameral constitution, a constitution that creates a dual or a multiple chamber of parliament, or two chambers of parliament. So when you talk of Ghana, we have only one chamber of parliament, but when you go to the UK or the US, we are having Congress and that of Senate. In the UK, they are having their normal parliament and also the House of Lords. So there are two chambers. The last thing today I'll be looking at is the sources of constitutional law. One thing I want you to get clear is that every area of law, say company law, law of contracts, law of evidence, and amongst others, you must look at the sources of law of that area of law, where that law or that area of law gets its laws from to deal with, or when you are dealing with such area of law, where do you find the laws to be dealing with that area of law? Anytime you hear sources of law, refer to our video on sources of law. Article 11 of the Constitution 1992 must come in mind. So I will not actually spend a lot of time explaining here because we actually have a video on sources of law. So some of the sources of the constitutional law are: one, the Constitution 1992, we have Act of Parliament, we have subsidiary legislation, we have existing laws, we have the common law of Ghana, and also we have text, commentaries, and articles from highly qualified publicists. So people who have gained certain pedigree in the area of law and are authorities. In Ghana, you can be relying on Professor Kumado, you can be relying on Dennis Dominic Eji, His Lordship, Sir Dennis Dominic Eji, amongst others. So today, we've actually learned about the introduction to constitutional law. We actually stated that when it comes to constitutional law, when you are asked such a question, it is two words being joined together. So basically, you say it is a law that governs constitutions. And we moved ahead to appreciate the base word constitution. And we said that we are not interested in the definitions that is given in textbooks and literatures. We are interested in what the constitution does. I mentioned to you that the constitution creates two things: the states and the arms of government, and goes ahead to distribute power to these arms of government amongst others. I moved ahead to look at the types of constitutions, and I mentioned that there are 4 types of it. Run you through all these 4 types of constitutions, and we are ending on sources of constitutional law, where I said rely heavily on Article 11, or also go back and watch our video on sources of law, where we actually discuss Article 11 in detail. And we also added text, commentaries, and articles from highly qualified publicists. Thank you very much for watching the Law Lab and this episode on Introduction to Constitutional Law. We are hoping and we are very hopeful that we bring you subsequent videos on other topics in constitutional law. My name remains Aaron Asiedwenji. Like, share, subscribe, and don't forget that do not leave all your matters to God. Take some to your lawyer. Your lawyer must also eat. Thank you.